"Why have you not built me a house of cedar?" God asks. But it wasn't a real question. It's not as if God was looking for David to build him a log cabin in Canmore, but it had been a long time since God could just sit back and rest at the divine feet. God's people had been moving around longer than any of them could remember. And God went with them, carried in the Ark of the Covenant, yes, made famous by Indiana Jones. God was tired. God's people were even more tired. It was time for phase 2 of God's liberation project. "I took you from the pasture," says God, "from following the sheep to be prince over my people, and I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. And I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel and plant them, so that they may live in their own place and be disturbed no more. And evildoers shall afflict them no more, as formerly from the time I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies." If that wasn't good, it gets even better. "Moreover," the Lord declares, "that I will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." And so it begins. Israel's glory years, the golden age of David's reign. Israel was now a real kingdom with real power. No longer were they just a wandering group of bumbling nomads fighting with themselves, making people laugh at the God who rescued them. Now they were established. Now they had arrived. Now they were solid. They finally got a seat at the imperial grown-ups table. But for those of us who know the backstory, we know that this wasn't really what God wanted for God's people. This was God caving in to people's demands. God didn't want to give them a king because they already had a king. God didn't want to give them a house because they were a house. God didn't want them to be planted in one spot, nailed down for all time, because God wanted them to be a light to all the nations, not just their neighbors. But that didn't seem to be good enough for the people, so that they demanded an earthly ruler. And when Israel, the people of God, demanded a king, Samuel warned them that this wasn't a good idea, and this is what he said. "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you," he warned. "He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. He will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow the ground and some to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain of your vineyards and give it to his officers and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys, and will put them to work for himself. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." In other words, a king will take your stuff and make you his slaves. He won't care about you. It's going to be all about him. Of course, they didn't listen to Samuel. And to show them a lesson that would last centuries and probably to stop their whining, God gave in. Samuel put a crown on Saul's head. Saul, as you may remember, is the brain-dead frat boy more interested in beer and sports than actually governing. And he was exactly the type of king that Samuel warned about. But this is what they wanted. If they were going to be taken seriously by the UN, they needed an accepted form of government. If they wanted to protect themselves against foreign invaders and build a prosperous economy, they felt they needed the proper infrastructure. If they wanted the other countries to stop sniggering at them as they walked by, they needed a leader who wasn't afraid to use the business end of a gun. And that's exactly what they got. And I think God was saddened by this whole episode, because this isn't what God really wanted for them. I think God preferred being carried around in the ark rather than kicking back in a palace. So when God asked David, he says, "Why have you not built me a house of cedar?" I think God was being facetious. It was a tongue-in-cheek question. I think God was more interested in being out in the world, having unrestricted mobility, rather than settling down in the suburbs and being established in the community. I think God was happy in the ark because it represented who God is, a God who will not be constrained in one place, a God who is always on the move, a God who drags God's people from place to place, being a light in the darkness wherever they go. And that's a good lesson for us today. It's a good challenge for us as I ponder where we're going and who we are, that God's feet will not be planted in one spot forever. And that's a challenge for us as a church. And it's a blessing. Because one thing that delights me about this congregation is that we don't make a fetish out of the building. We don't see this as God's holy house as such. We see it for what it is, a tool, a place where the family gathers. We don't see it as an end in itself. Because when I was in seminary and pastor school, I was told that you lose 5 members for every inch you move the baptismal font. I didn't know if that was like a warning or a suggestion. He said that people demanded that the font be nailed down because if it was good enough for Grandpa Willie, then doggone it, it's good enough for me. And here, we move, of course, that font from various places of prominence, usually to the front, and no one bats an eyebrow. In fact, this whole space is meant to be functional. During the week, this space can look very different than what it does now. And as I look at how we use our worship space, I'm guessing that if I did this in my first church in Williamsburg, Ontario, I would have been fired. Because maybe it's a cultural thing. Because when the members of St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Williamsburg, Ontario, bolted the pews down in 1826, the pews were meant to stay down. But here, we know that our building is where God calls us to learn and to pray together and to invite others to the family meal. Our church building is one way we serve the community with the various groups and the people that come through our doors through the week. We know that this building is not a cage for God because God will not be caged. And more than that, you know that this building is not the house of God per se. You know that you are the house of God, that you are the sanctuary where the Holy One dwells, that you are a temple of the Holy and life-giving Spirit, that you are the tabernacle that carries God wherever you go, that you have within you the awesome power of an awesome God, that no matter where you go or where you are, God is within you, giving you strength to meet any challenge. No matter where you go or where you are, God is inside you, giving you courage to face any fear. No matter where you go or where you are, no matter how lost you feel, no matter if the road in front looks dark and you can't see your feet, God is leading you toward your destiny from inside you. You are never far from God because God is always with you. You can always call upon God because God is always inside you. God travels with you, and God travels within you. And that's why you're here today. To remember who you are, to remember whose you are, to retell the story that gives shape to your life, to reconnect with others who share that story, and to return to the God who will never leave you, because you are God's house. We together are God's tabernacle, carrying the God of the universe within us and among us. We together are the Holy of Holies, a living sanctuary, a breathing tabernacle, offering asylum from life's challenges, healing from the wounds we've received on the journey, and fellowship among God's people. We together are a free and moving temple of the Lord, journeying with the one who made all things new. And God will be known with our lives, and we bear witness to God's love and mercy by offering kindness and care to those who need it, and forgiveness to those who've hurt us, and to seek forgiveness to those we have hurt. Why have you not built me a house of cedar? God asks with a smirk. Because God already knows the answer. God doesn't need one. God does not stand still. God is carried within us. God is carried with us wherever we go. And may this be so among us. Amen.